The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of The Way with Anoa. Thank you so much for tuning in, checking in, and you know, spend a little time with me. Ben and Nick and the rest of the Progressive Army, or whoever's going to show up, will be joining us at 9 to talk about election coverage. Today's the New York primary. Polls are still open. If you are in New York, or if you have friends and family who are in New York and you have not gotten to the polls yet, get out and vote. If you are in line at 9 o'clock, they have to let you vote. Just do what you can. Get out the vote. It's still 55 minutes left. Every vote matters. And so basically today, because we have a primary day, don't want to get too heavy into anything one particular, going to just give a few highlights news-wise, and then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about some of the issues going on in New York, and also give you all an update of what happened with the emergency lawsuit that was filed. So thanks. Just a little personal anecdote. I'm so excited because my uncle in Queens and my aunt in Harlem both went and voted for Bernie today. Yay. Go family. So that means that all of the voting age adults in my immediate family have voted for Senator Sanders. So much for how he don't got the black vote, right? I mean, he got my black socially conscious family on lock. So, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot going on. I mean, it's the news, right? So there's always a lot going on. Just I saw a news update on Twitter that I thought was pretty interesting, considering some things we've been talking about in terms of, transgender rights and these restroom cases that have begun cropping up. An appeals court in Virginia ruled in favor of a transgender student in a restroom case. A federal appeals court in Richmond, Virginia, the United States Court of Appeals of the Fourth Circuit found in favor of the student Gavin Grimm. As we see, we just have nearby North Carolina that has recently signed a law, as we've discussed previously, limiting transgender individuals from using the bathrooms in public places unless it corresponds. They have to use the bathroom that corresponds with their birth sex, right? And in this case, in the Virginia case, it has determined that the Title IX, that the House bill, that this new law, it violates Title IX by discriminating against transgender students and forcing them to use the wrong restroom at school. So, but I know you're talking about a Virginia case, and that's North Carolina law. Aha! So, there's this really cool thing in the United States. When you sue in federal court and you have federal circuits, right? Groups of states are grouped together within a circuit, and both North Carolina and Virginia are in the Fourth Circuit. So it's really going to be interesting to see how this Virginia case. Can you turn that off, please? Excuse me, sorry. Kids come in the room, and my daughter and her friends are actually listening to me right now. That's kind of cool, right? Cool, Mom. But anyway, so it'll be interesting to see what impact, if any, this Virginia case brought in the federal, in the Fourth Circuit of Appeals. What impact, if any, this will now have on the North Carolina case? Lambda Legal and the ACLU are basically trying to argue that this ruling makes it very clear that the North Carolina law is discriminatory and illegal and is invalid, right? So it'll be interesting to see kind of going further how that all plays out. And in this case, it was really interesting because the youth in question, he was originally allowed to use the boys' restroom. There was a similar case, I can't remember if it was Oklahoma or Colorado, a while back. It was a 6-year-old, I think it was an elementary school student who was a transgender girl who had been permitted to use the bathroom and then was not allowed. And it was the same situation where the school had originally allowed the child to use the bathroom that they identified as, and then for whatever reason, the school board or administration came in and changed the rule. And that's kind of what happened in this case, that the case has been rebanded back down to the district court, and they are have been ordered to reevaluate the student's request for a preliminary injunction. So it's going to be interesting again to see how these cases begin to play out, particularly now that we have a federal court of appeals now weighing in, at least to an extent, in the Fourth Circuit on this issue of basically limiting the use of restrooms by transgender students. And let's be clear, this is not just an issue of like, oh, I know some people probably like, well, oh, it's a bathroom. It's not that big of a deal. Well, it's not that big of a deal for you because you're not being hamstrung. You're not being told that you can't use the proper restroom for your gender, for how you identify, right? I'm not going to say it's the same thing, but restricting people's right and ability to use public accommodations, what does that sound like? You know? I mean, once upon a time, we were told as black people, as non-white people, we were told that we couldn't use certain bathrooms for some arbitrary and random reason that actually has no real valid argument when we talk about, you know, public safety, health, welfare, that type of thing. So I thought that was a pretty interesting case when I saw the headline flash up earlier today. And there is also a new union endorsement for Bernie Sanders today. The union representing laid-off carrier workers in Indiana has endorsed Senator Sanders. The carrier workers, Trump has mentioned them. The fact that their plant has been closed down. So they're represented by the United Steelworkers Local 1999, and they're based in Indianapolis. And they've basically, their executive membership board, they made the recommendation to endorse him, but the membership itself actually approved the endorsement at its monthly meeting. Their main union, the United Steelworkers, has not endorsed anyone as of yet. But they decided to back Senator Sanders because of his consistency in opposing trade deals, such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, aka NAFTA, and considering that this is a factory that's now being moved overseas to Mexico. You know, there are over 2,000 people losing their jobs as a result of, you know, these free to be you and me trade agreements that are free and helpful for everybody but the American workers themselves. So as we're going into, even though this is in Indiana, as we're looking ahead now to Pennsylvania, right, which is home to, you know, it's more of that, you know, old steel town, you know, hardworking factory worker that has been kind of like left out of the process when we're talking about these trade agreements, when we're talking about investment. It's so great that we've been adding all these jobs over however many consecutive quarters, blah, blah, blah. However, many of the jobs being added do not come near to replacing the jobs that have been lost. And that is kind of the issue as we see here when we have like factories like Carrier closing down, because we have lost manufacturing jobs that once provided so much opportunity for families, and what's being added doesn't even come close to supplementing that, right? So as you know, we keep talking about Bernie's not a real Democrat, but he is the one that has consistently, you know, eschewed traditional Democratic values and protecting workers, protecting families, protecting the opportunity to earn, because it's not like, you know, they get into all that, oh, the Bernie people just want free stuff. No, we don't just want free stuff. We all pay taxes, all of us. Poor people pay taxes. Rich people maybe not as much as they should, but we all pay taxes. So I'm not trying to get something that I didn't earn or something I have not paid into. You know, if anything, we are owed stuff, right? This isn't free. This is what we're entitled to. This is what we're owed. This is the stuff that Bernie Sanders is talking about is what we should all be for. And actually, just as an aside, If you guys look, just Google it. There was a preliminary report came out in February 2015. It was an autopsy of the 2014 Democratic Party midterm losses. Right? It's this beautifully written piece document. Donna Brazier was one of the people involved in this committee that was commissioned by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They kind of really look at what the party needed to do to get back on track into winning. And, there's a lot of stuff in there. And you start reading this document, and you're like, wow, the Democratic Party and getting back to the core values of the party. You read it, and you think about what candidate that actually embodies those values, has those programs and issues and initiatives as a part of their platform. Let me tell you something. It ain't Hillary Clinton. And they were supposed to release, get this, the final report was supposed to be released in May 2015. I cannot find any mention. I've been on the DNC website. I've tweeted the DNC. I've tried to find this final report, this final recommendation. By all accounts, it seems like they scrapped this really great. It talks about addressing issues of campaign finance reform, dealing with raising the wage, addressing issues in terms of trade and loss of jobs. Like there are all these different things that are so beautifully enunciated back in February, last winter, early spring, before Hillary Clinton went so far left. It just seems like the party just abandoned all their democratic values because they had to crown their queen. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I talk about a little bit of the New York hijinks today. But it's cool to start seeing. I know there are a lot of locals. People can brag that, oh, Hillary Clinton has all of the big unions supporting her. That may be true. She has all of the unions, by all accounts, that just decided at the top and did not listen to their rank and file. Because even though SEIU has endorsed her, you have several SEIU locals that have endorsed Senator Sanders. You have locals of other organizations like Unite Here. You have all different types of locals from different groups that have endorsed them, regardless of whether or not their actual parent union has endorsed. So this is a pretty cool one to see United Steelworkers out of Indianapolis as we look forward towards Indiana. So. The next, a little bit more sobering today. Many of you may be familiar, may not be familiar, but Officer Peter Liang, the former New York City police officer who killed Akai Gurley in the Brooklyn Pink Apartments back in, I believe it was 2014. Today, he had been found guilty. Previously, which was like, yay. Finally, a cop got not only charged but convicted, right? We should be rejoicing. This sounds like great progress. However, so today was his sentencing. So he got 5 years of service? He got 5 years in jail? No. He got 5 years community service. No house arrest. 5 years community service for killing an unarmed man. He was a rookie, and there are people who feel sorry. This is a rookie cop. He's out there, this is when we talk about broken window policing, he's out there, he's in the projects, he's out there, he's in the hallway, he has his gun drawn. So he basically was not doing as he was supposed to be doing, right? He was charged with manslaughter and official misconduct, and the judge, Justice Danny K. Chun, he reduced the charges to criminally negligent homicide right before sentencing. So this decision to not imprison, it follows the recommendation of the district attorney, Ken Thompson. The Brooklyn, he had announced previously that he was not going to ask for prison time because there was no evidence of intent to kill or injure, right? Because he just, Mr. Gurley was coming through the door. Officer Liang was just shooting wildly because he was scared. But what's problematic with this whole, well, he didn't mean to do it, it's okay, it wasn't really like intentional. Intent is not at issue here, right? And the problem we still have, it's great that a cop has finally been taken to task for something they did that's improper, and it wasn't just brushed under the rug. I do commend District Attorney Ken Thompson for that. I mean, Ken Thompson, look him up. He's done, some amazing work in Brooklyn. He's single-handedly, he undertook upon his own review prior cases from the DA before him that were riddled with issues of prosecutorial abuse and misconduct, as well as officer abuse and misconduct. So I was really optimistic when this first case first came up and saw that he was the DA involved from what I had read about him. This, though, it kind of brings back to the conversation that people have had over the last few years with these cases and the ability of prosecutors to actually go after cops, right? But then at the same time, there were protests around this case. People were wondering, well, why is it that the one cop, and I think it's like 10 years in New York to actually be punished, right? Why is it that it's the Asian one, right? It's another person of color. Same thing can be said about the Eric Garner case. The only cop in that case to be disciplined or action to be taken against is a black woman cop that was involved, not the actual cop that placed Eric Garner in the chokehold that killed him. Does that make sense? It does not. But in this particular case, I think when you look at the actions and the way this officer acted, like, you have someone that you've accidentally shot, right? Okay. My bad is not good enough. But to go further and to look at what happened afterwards, right? So instead of calling the ambulance, he calls his union rep, or he texted them. The aunt, Mr. Gurley's aunt, Hortensia Peterson, shouted out today in the hallway after the sentencing that there is no justice. Akai Gurley's life didn't matter. What does it mean to seek justice in these cases? What are we looking for? Does Ken Thompson now deserve to be primaried? I mean, we've seen this happen in other cases, right? The district attorney in Cuyahoga County, I can never remember his name, probably because I think he's crap and I don't remember his name very well. And Anita Alvarez in Chicago, is that what we do? There are issues with DA Mosby in Baltimore as well. People are not really happy with her handling of the Freddie Gray case. So as we look at these cases, as we look at how do we leverage our opportunity, how do we leverage our progressivism, going forward? What do we do? So correction, Q actually found the elusive report that I could not find from the DNC, and I will post that up later. I will note, though, that report came out several months later. That report says it came out in November 2015, not May 2015. So by then, the race was a lot different by November than it was in early spring when it was originally supposed to come out. So it'll be interesting to dig into that a little bit later. But I just think it's interesting when we're looking at someone. I understand not wanting to quote unquote ruin the life of a young man who made a mistake, but had he been a young man who was not a cop, had he been black or Latino, how many DAs will look and say, well, he made a mistake, so just give him community service when there's someone who's dead? How many judges, right, take it upon their own review to reduce charges for someone? Like, when does that ever happen? So, I mean, there really is a conversation that needs to happen about the treatment of police officers in the system versus the treatment of everyone else, right? Because we already have disparity between, like, black and Latino defendants, right, and white defendants. We already have disparities there. But then when you add cops into the mix, okay, you can say, well, there are disparities too based on race and stuff within cops. Yeah, but it still seems like cops, unless they do something like seriously egregious, like rape a whole bunch of women, right? Like, it seems like it takes like huge issues for there to be any type of parity in how they're treated compared to the rest of the general population. So I'm glad that charges were brought. I'm glad this wasn't just like swept under the rug like what happened in Staten Island. However, at the same time, it's just for someone to get 5 years probation and 800 hours of community service for whether they meant to do it or not, for killing and taking away someone else, I don't know. Like, I'd like to hear what you guys think about this case. So you guys can hit me up on Twitter and just let me know what you think, or drop a message in the chat and let me know. Speaking of, I mentioned Freddie Gray. It is 1 year since his death. For those who may not remember, Freddie Gray was the young man in Baltimore last year who sustained spinal cord injuries while being transported in a police van. They gave him a rough ride, or I forget what the exact terminology the police use. But this is another instance of he was running. It's like, why do they run? Well, police are shady. You can't necessarily trust them all the time. I know, like, we all have we grow up as cops. Some of us are raised as cops are our friends, and we should trust them. And actually, that's how I've raised my kids for the most part, right? Because that has been the experience that they have had where they have grown up. I've had a very different experience growing up, in New York and Chicago. Cops are not always the good guys. Unfortunately, there are some crooked people out there, and that taints our experience at times when we're living in certain neighborhoods. So why would you run? Because they might be looking for somebody to pin stuff on. It happens. It's not that far-fetched. But he for whatever reason, some people have said that he ran when he saw the police, when they attempted to stop him. Why they stopped him? Why did they stop anyone, right? And they found a knife on him. The police tried to argue that it was an illegal switchblade, but there's some discrepancy about whether or not it was actually illegal, whether that was even grounds to arrest him. But from all accounts, he did not resist arrest at the time when he was arrested. However, he suffered severe injuries in the back of the transport. There was some indication he wasn't strapped down properly. There were all types of stuff, and he fell into a coma, and he died a week later. So it's been a week, a week ago, last year, a week ago was when the actual incident itself happened. He died a week later, a year ago today. And there have been activity and organizing that has happened since then. We even saw that Senator Sanders took a walking tour through his neighborhood in Baltimore. That's when, Senator Sanders infamously shouted down the reporters present about how he didn't want to talk about ISIS. He was there to talk about poverty, essentially. So there was a rally planned today in front of the town hall. It was organized by Coalition for Transformation and Betterment of Baltimore. And there was another event this past weekend. There are several vigils planned as well. But the question that I saw across some of the different articles I was reading today was what has changed, right? What has changed in the past year? Or what has not changed, right? We do know, well, if maybe some of you don't know, that the cops involved have all pled not guilty. The first trial ended in a mistrial. The next trial, I think, is set to begin next month, if I remember correctly. And the district attorney, she has, she's come under some fire because people, like I said, are not very happy with how she's proceeded. Some have viewed her as botching the case that ended in the mistrial. There are those that felt that it shouldn't have been that difficult, right? I mean, but the next case that's coming up, there was a motion from the prosecution to compel Officer Garrett E. Miller to testify in another officer's trial, which is set to begin May 10th. Now, they were both involved, so Officers Miller and Officer Nero. Nero's the one whose case is coming up. He was involved in the initial arrest. And they've wanted to give Officer Miller limited immunity, basically, to testify. And although he's not being asked to testify, Well, yes. He's being asked to testify in these other cases. And they haven't actually, they're trying to compel him to give testimony, right? So that was appealed, and then so they allowed him to testify in the one case under limited immunity. And then there was the judge at issue, he blocked the request to have him testify in all the other cases too. And now they also have another officer who they're trying to have testify. And so they wanted him to testify, Officer Porter. They want Officer Porter to testify all these other trials. And so the high court, because this went all the way up to the state high court in Maryland, and it did rule that Porter does have to testify in the other cases. So they claim they're not going to ask for any other officers to testify, but this kind of opens the doorway for all the other officers to testify to the events. And this for some, why would this be an issue? Well, it's compelling someone to give testimony, right? Particularly if they have their own charges pending against them, it gets really touchy, right? To have someone potentially incriminate themselves in someone else's trial without having some type of deal or immunity or whatever on the table. So procedurally, like on that side, it'll be really interesting to see how this case handles. But it'll also see, again, how will the community respond to the handling of this case, right? It's very intricate. There are several different players and stuff moving. There are several different officers involved. When we start talking about creating change and leveraging electoral politics, or we're talking about local voting, I would see district attorneys as, for those that are actually elected and not appointed, I would see this as a local voter issue. Like, do you look at this? Do you look at this and say, well, I don't think that you handled this properly, so we're going to find someone else to run against you? Like, what do you do? And do we try to work with the person that we know who at least seems to be interested in doing these cases, or do we just, we got to be careful not to have just a knee-jerk reaction to vote for somebody else just because they've upset us. We really got to be, a lot of this stuff, Anoa, voting's not everything. No, voting is not everything. It's not the end-all, be-all. But we need people to be active and engaged in the process, because we're talking about these police issues, right? And there was a case today, an article today in Huffington Post that discussed, cops are still killing people at alarming rates. However, people just don't seem to be as hyped about it the same way as they were in the past few years, right? We don't have the hashtags the same way, right? Like social media, I guess it's like, so if social media isn't paying attention, the news doesn't pay attention, and therefore people think it's not happening. But I would argue that now we see really active citizen groups, right? We see really active organization and dynamic intervention happening on a local level where people are getting involved. Because no, we're not going to have some big name lawyer swoop in and threaten to sue. We're not going to have some national news crew on the ground necessarily for every case. We're seeing that, but that doesn't mean that the problem is going away. It doesn't mean it's gotten any better. This means people are more active and involved, will have to be more active and involved consistently, right? So do you even know how the police, like how decisions are made, funding issues like that in your local community? Does that go through city council? Like, do you bring together people to go and hear an issue, involving funding for certain things? So like if they want to fund for body cameras, for example, right? There are some articles that talk about, 5 different police reforms that are problematic and that you should at least be vocal on, if not even possibly oppose. I don't necessarily agree with the whole list, but I think it's really interesting to note that you as a taxpayer can go to a city council meeting or whatever other committee meeting that exists in your jurisdiction where these issues are being taken up. For example, here in Atlanta, while it's not directly the same, they created the City of Atlanta Public Schools has abolished their relationship with the Atlanta Police Department. Police and schools have a very interesting relationship, I will say. And they're going to create their own police force. Well, you best believe I'm going to find out with children who are in Atlanta Public Schools what exactly that looks like, right? What is the purview? Like, how does that work? Because if things are happening in school and the school has its own police force, like, I mean, there are all types of due process issues and other protections that we need to make sure still children in schools would have. Same thing where you're talking about whether municipalities are creating some new, section or division for some issue or whatever. I mean, we have to be involved. We have to be engaged in what's going on. We can't just show up at the last minute. It's like, hey, I don't like this. I mean, y'all feeling me? Like there is a real issue that needs our attention. And so even if we don't have the hashtags, even if we don't have all the Twitter, activists telling us what we're supposed to care about, even if we don't have those things, happening, we ourselves on our local level, we are the movement. We are the media. We have to be active and engaged. Just last week, we saw Black Lives Matter of upstate New York utilizing their meeting with Senator Bernie Sanders to help raise awareness for the situation in Albany with Dante Ivey, right? And putting their mayor on notice that if the cops at issue aren't handled in 2017, so next year when she runs for re-election, she best believe that they will be organizing against her. So we need to leverage our vote. We need to leverage our engagement. We need to leverage our participation in the process. But we also need to be engaged and active in the process, which takes me to New York today. How y'all doing? Y'all still with me? I hope so. Wow. So New York is voting today. Polls are closing about another 25, 30 minutes or so, right? If you got it, people in New York and they haven't gotten the vote yet, tell them to go get over to the polls. As long as they're aligned at 9 o'clock, they can vote. So much has been happening. So much has been happening today, right? There is an article on Think Progress from this morning. New York's primary is not going smoothly so far. That is to say it lightly. In addition to, Ben mentioned that there were, I believe it was 60,000 Democrats in Brooklyn that were reported purged for some random reason from the system. Well, actually today, de Blasio has said now that the number is actually more like 120,000. 120,000 registered Dems purged in Brooklyn. Why? Anybody know? Because I don't know. I don't get it. These are registered Dems. These are people who either have been Dems, have voted, not people who are just not inactive, who were not active, not people who were inactive, not people who were independents and didn't know the rules. Because that's there's some confusion about all this stuff, and I'm not surprised, extremely discouraged, very disheartened with so-called liberals who have taken to parsing and splitting hairs about what is and is not voter suppression, right? Well, you're not taking a poll test, so it's not real voter suppression. Or, well, you're not in the deep south and you don't have to travel 5 hours to vote, so that's not real voter suppression. Really? We're going to put a litmus test on what is real suppression and what isn't? Like, this type of stuff is, like, really ridiculous. People who are registered, people who are active Dems, since we want to put a real, we have all this real Dem talk. People who are quote-unquote real Dems were not allowed to vote today. Or they were told they had to vote by affidavit ballot, okay? And likely it's, in a lot of cases, those ballots do not ever even get counted. So in all your chest poking and you got to be right, so you must know everything, attitude, some of these, Twitter jockeys and so-called journalists, like, you've just been spending all day telling 100,000, 20,000 people in Brooklyn, not to mention those in the Bronx and upstate and elsewhere that received either confusing information or found themselves purged. It happened all over the state, but there was this huge concentration in Brooklyn. And it's a problem. It is a serious problem when we tell people, like, well, your issue is not as important as these other people's issues, so we don't care that you couldn't vote. On the flip side, some of y'all who just now realize that voter suppression happens in America, I need y'all to sit all the way down. And please, 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 my dear liberal white friends, stop trying to argue what's going on with, like, independence and stuff in New York. Stop trying to use black people and our historical issues with voting rights, stop trying to use that as your justification. Like, seriously, I'm going to ask you to stop. I don't need you to argue on my behalf because, quite honestly, a lot of you all have not paid attention to voter issues that have been happening since the gutting of the VRA. You know, you got Scott in Wisconsin. I mean, all of that stuff that had actually happened, I believe, in 2011. But they have been tied up in litigation all this time, which is why this was the first time the Wisconsin law was even at issue in an election. So there's a lot of stuff that is happening, and what people, I hope, are now understanding is you have to pay attention. This is the price you pay for not being engaged in the process. You can say that the system is crooked and it's rigged and it's not for us, but when you sit outside the system and do not pay attention to what is going on or to the plight of others, and then you whine when it's happening to you, I'm kind of not very sympathetic. Because, you know, I was a registered Democrat at 18, right? When I first got the right to vote, I became a registered Democrat. I was so happy to do my service. I used to look at my mother crazy when she voted Green Party. I'm like, what is your problem? There's no point, blah, blah, blah. When I moved to West Virginia, I became, I believe the term is unaffiliated. I was very proud of that. But before I did so, I made sure I understood whether or not I would still be able to vote. Because like Bernie, even though I still voted 96, 95% of the time with Democrats, I did not feel like I had to be a part of their party. And West Virginia Dems, they're only a little bit better than West Virginia Republicans. They're crazy. No diss to any of my friends who are listening, but y'all are. Y'all let people like Manchin and now Jim Justice come and run. Really hoping Booth Goodwin becomes the next governor of West Virginia, but that's a whole other topic. So I made sure I understood the rules. I have other friends who are independent other places. Here in Georgia, I don't, you know, it's a little different. We have open primary here, but I still made sure I understood the rules before I chose not to declare Dem, right? You have to make sure you understand what's going on in the process. You can't be, and you Facebook and Twitter election law experts, right? You all are running around giving people information that's not even accurate. So while on the one hand, the lawsuit that went forward today with election justice, kudos to you guys for trying, right? Because someone needed to do something, because we have all these Dems, we have all these groups that are normally the ones that traditionally get out there, that deal with getting out the vote, that deal with, you know, voter suppression issues. You know, there's information out there, and we need to make sure we're sharing the correct information. So kudos to groups who have actually been doing this work and stuff, but for everyone sharing information, like, see, independents were able to vote all along. All they had to do was this. No, you're wrong. That's a closed primary means independents can't vote. But the issue primarily where people have been purged who were registered as Democrats. Either they have always been Democrats and they were always active voters. There was an incident out Clinton Hill, Lafayette, Waverly Place, around that area. An entire block was purged. Now, these are people who regularly vote. They're Dems. They regularly vote. And the poll workers were even surprised. They're like, wait a minute, you know, you guys, we don't even see y'all in the book. You know, there's someone out in Queens who had a testimony earlier today. Same thing. You know, I always vote. I'm a Dem. These are Democrats, right? So when we have people on Twitter, you know, in the news, it's like a triumvirate of pro-Hillary reporters and stuff today, all over Twitter, bashing people for trying to get this right to vote today because, you know, well, why don't people understand that rules? And, oh my God, they're closed primaries for a reason, and our party has decided that it's going to have it this way, and that's what it is. I'm not really interested. I'm not here. I'm really not here to listen to your justification of this screwed up system, okay? Closed primaries are a problem, and they're a problem for two reasons. One, in this case, the closed primary is a problem because the deadline is in October before most people even know what is even going on. If my primary is not until April, why in the hell do I have to declare my party affiliation in October? Like, even if we're talking about Republicans, right? Because back in October, you didn't even know what was happening with that circus crazy show. And what if, as a Republican, you were going to decide that, you know what, this party has gone to pieces. I don't want nothing to do with it. I'd rather see what the Dems have going on. you have killed your ability to engage new voters and get new people in the process. But you know what? Y'all don't care about that, because in a closed primary, you clearly you're fine with low voter turnout, because you're going to try later on in the general once you have your chosen candidate, right? And that's the problem we have now. We're having a serious issue because people are waking up and realizing, like, wow, wait a minute. This is a system that's not fair. Yes, it's been in place. Yes, people should understand the rules. But the issue of fundamental fairness cannot be ignored, disregarded, or shut down just because you're on the quote-unquote winning team. I don't care what the outcome is today, right? The bottom line is, not only did you have people who were not aware, there are people who probably just in the past few months became politically engaged and involved. Like, I saw a testimony from one woman today, and there's some really great articles in Think Progress, some of the local New York, outlets and stuff. There was an issue in upstate New York, and I think it was Greece, right outside of Rochester, where there were postcards sent out for next month's, I think it was their Board of Education elections, maybe. They sent out postcards for a different polling location. So for whatever reason, these people vote at a completely different place for this other election, and many people went there and then had to go back to their actual correct election place, right? So that's confusing. And there was already issues with confusion because people who had registered to vote, they sent out the New York State primary dates as a reminder, which is some months down the line, and not the presidential one that was today. So there's a lot of confusion. Now de Blasio, oh my God, this is a travesty. Oh my God, what is going on? This is not right. So they're going to investigate. They're going to do an audit of the New York City Board of Elections, at least. That doesn't really say much for other stuff. And, I know we have Michael Solomon from the Progressive Army. He had his own story that he shared with us today. Last night he did call in and talk to Ben about kind of some of the issues that they were having. So Michael actually did have to go before a court and get a court order today. He had to go before a judge and get a court order to be able to vote at an actual machine. Unfortunately, his mother was not able to. She had like an hour commute to get to the court, and the county official in question went ahead without her, basically tanked her case, so she had to vote by affidavit ballot. And then with her, if they both weren't, Michael's case, they were different issues ultimately, and Michael had a bunch of documentation, including, I think it was the Board of Elections acknowledged that it was actually their error. So that worked out in his favor, but it was a huge chunk of time out of his day. Thankfully, he was able to take the time to spend hours waiting to see a judge, right, to be able to vote. But how many people could not do that? Because a lot of these people who voted via affidavit ballot today, they probably could have been seen before a judge as well and gotten a court order to be able to vote at a machine to be definitely counted. There was another machine, I think it was Brunswick, Brooklyn today. There were locations that opened 2 hours late. There were locations that the machines were broken. There's another issue, I think it's Brunswick, in Brooklyn. The scanner was not working, so they were like, oh, well, the votes are not going to be counted today. Huh? And the excuse is, well, this is not new for New York City. Turnout's really high all over New York State, by the way, but this is not new for New York City. I don't understand what the hell is going on with people. And here's the problem we have again, right? Well, these are closed primaries, and these are for real Democrats only. Why the hell do you people get to choose for us who are going to be our choices in November? Like, that's not fair. That's like pulling together all the cool kids in school. That's like pulling together all the populars and letting them choose, and make some really big decision and say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. You guys vote between choice A and choice B. No, this is not Mean Girls. This is not some other variation of a Disney movie. And, sorry, everybody. Got a little riled up and messed up the microphone. But, we are rounding up, and I'm so sorry that I did not make time for calls today. But there's just way too much going on, and it's hot. I done worked myself up. But I appreciate everyone who takes the time to come in. I was supposed to take a break and accept some calls, but, there's been a lot of crap going on in New York today, no matter what happens, I just want to give a shout out to everybody who has worked so hard. If you are a volunteer, you know what I'm saying, give yourself a pat on the back, a round of applause, hug yourself tight. I mean, the staff in New York, shout out to Michelle and Taylor and like everybody that has been really doing it in New York, across New York State, folks at Upstate, Rochester, Buffalo. You guys, this is what it's all about. So people being active, engaged, and involved in the process. I don't care how many haters you run into on Twitter. Y'all stop arguing with them low info trolls, because that is taking away energy that we need to be rounding up and rallying the masses, because we need to keep plugging away. It don't matter what they say. It don't matter if they talk about your mama. They only words. Like, seriously, if you really have to correct factual inconsistencies, go for it. But yeah, I mean, New York, full of issues, and why, I don't understand why we get to these election days and it's like, wow, well, we just had so much turnout. Huh? You didn't know you were going to have high turnout? You had massive voter registration. You had high voter registration, right? So you didn't think that would mean high voter turnout? No? Really? You have really enthusiastic, 28,000 people were in Prospect Park this weekend. I don't know if any of you are in New York or from New York or whatever, you ever been to Prospect Park, but that's my childhood, right? When Central Park, Prospect Park, all that, it's so yeah. So pay attention, and like, seriously though, it's not an issue. The lawsuit today, ultimately, people were told that they had to go before an actual judge in their county where they voted to get a court order to be able to vote. So, which is actually something that is a lesser known provision on the books that people could do. And those who were able to, had the time, did so, and many were successful. But we really do need to look at the system of voting in this country. We're supposedly the quote-unquote greatest democracy on earth, but we are riddled with issues. We have low voter turnout. We have voter suppression tactics happening. There is no reason, there's no valid reason for Democrats to be dropped from the polls the way they are. What has happened is just ridiculous. So, I don't know. I know people were saying, what about Internal Affairs looking into this? Are they corrupt? There's going to be an investigation, at least in New York City, and their Board of Elections. Mayor de Blasio did have some statements about that, and I'll make sure I tweet out all these links if you guys want to look for them to retweet them. But yeah. So today was a day. And we should have some coverage for you guys very soon. And results to just kind of let you know what's going on. So, yeah, I mean, New York's kind of crazy, but voting is crazy. And so as we look forward, right, I mean, we've learned so much now. And shout out to people who were sharing correct information. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, they're part of election protection. Look out for them, going forward in remaining states. Like, there are established groups that are supposed to do this stuff, and we need to hold them accountable in this process. Regardless of, they're supposed to be nonpartisan, right? Because that's the problem I'm having with so-called Democrats, like gleefully cheering that Bernie bros or Bernie bots can't vote. You're a Democrat. This is supposed to be the party of protecting voters. Oh, wait, my bad. This is the party that wouldn't let Fannie Lou Hamer sit at the convention. Right. That's real. Like 60, I mean, people want to look at the Democrats like they're so great. Like, oh my God, well, our party's so much better than Republicans. Y'all are actively suppressing the vote. So yeah. So I do have 12 minutes. If anybody would like to call, 857-600-0518. You guys can call in and we can talk a little bit before we switch on over to actual coverage of the primary. So, but in New York today, a mess, just all over the place. There's a New York Daily News article just about how the New York primary voting was bungled, right? There's a quote. It says, unfortunately, in New York City, this is nothing new. The next president could very easily be decided tonight, and yet the incompetence of the Board of Elections puts a cloud over these results. It's time we clean up the mess. But this is not new. It's not new and it's not acceptable. You know, there was a record-setting deluge of primary day voter complaints here Tuesday. The Lawyers Committee, I did see a post from them earlier, and it did say that like there were a lot of calls coming out of Brooklyn in particular. Again, Brooklyn's where that 120,000. Previously it was at 60,000. Now it's 120,000 who were purged from the rolls. And the issues include, you know, not just people having issues with casting their ballots, but broken machines. There were precincts that were closed. How am I'm supposed to vote? And especially if we're talking about New York, where people are relying on buses and public transportation and stuff like that to get to here and there, especially if I'm trying to do this on my way to or from work. And if we're talking about I'm getting off work, so if I've worked all day, I'm going to go vote, and I still got to pick up kids or cook dinner or whatever, these things are an inconvenience. So when we have people cackling about how, you should have known better, there's no early voting in New York. You can file an absentee ballot, you know, at your Board of Elections office. I think it was like yesterday would have been the last day to do that. But for most people, you know, going to vote, people would want to vote, but it's difficult. It is not a process that's made convenient or easy to people. And you know, New York, we're not talking about some Republican conservative bastion of oppressive rights. This is supposed to be New York. It's supposed to be this great progressive liberal haven, Democrats, blah, blah, blah. Well, New York City at least, right? And so to see this type of stuff happening there, and everyone's kind of like, oh, wow, well, New York's just a mess with vote. New York's just a mess of this type of things. It happens. That's unacceptable. That is really unacceptable. You're messing with people's money. You're messing with their time. And if I'm late for work or late picking up my sitter, I mean, my kids from the sitter, that causes all other types of issues. So it's really great that all these, you know, people who are in certain positions professionally, personally, economically can sit there and, whatever, you couldn't vote. Too bad for you. I mean, the other thing that we had an internal discussion about is like some of these people, I mean, it's highly unlikely that everyone who couldn't vote today was a Bernie supporter. More than likely, right, because we're talking about Democrats. So if you're a long-held Democrat, because who has been doing well with people who are established Democrats? Hillary Clinton. Hillary supporters have more than likely been, you know, bothered. This has been bothering them too. So like to have one group saying, well, too bad for you, you should have known the rules. You're disregarding people who support your candidate, who also were denied the right to vote. Like the insanity. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? You have people who just a year ago were arguing about constitutional protections. When they want to use Black Lives Matter's work, right, and Black Lives Mattering and things of that nature to leverage their platform, their position, right? They did so, and now all of a sudden, it's, you know, when we were talking about how bad the establishment was and because they weren't doing things and people weren't listening and we need to hold people accountable for things they do, but that only matters when it's your side you care, with the side you care about. That is not what I was raised to believe democratic values were supposed to be all about. You know, my uncle, I mentioned my uncle in Queens voted today, very excited because he was pro-Hillary up until like 3 days ago. And it was his fiance, uncle's 60-something black man, retired postal worker. His fiance, 60-something retired postal worker, black woman. Right? So she should be like Hillary's like main demographic. No, he texted me. He was like, apparently Sharon's feeling the burn. I might have to rethink some things. So that was my cue, because I had been trying to work my uncle. I'm the favorite niece. I've been trying to work my uncle. I'm his only niece. But I've been trying to work my uncle for weeks, months. I had laid off him for a while, and I tried again. I laid off him. So then when he told me that, I said, okay, so I pounced. And then I left him alone. I kind of got him to say something nice about Bernie finally, then I left him alone. Today he texted me saying, you know, he voted for Bernie, and I was so excited. But the other thing he texted me that was very disturbing was that my grandmother's name was still on the rolls above his. My grandmother passed away in 2013. My grandma's not even a co-signer on my student loans anymore, right? Like, she's been removed from everything, right? Like, her death has been recorded properly in the county and all this other stuff, right? So we're out here purging people from the rolls who shouldn't be, you know, for whatever reason. But somehow you all leave my grandmother, who died 3 years ago, on the rolls. And my uncle, who, you know, took care of my grandmother when she was sick, and it's still, I mean, 3 years, you never get over the loss of a close family member ever, right? It gets better, but seeing her signature in the book above his, like, that kind of like threw a loop for his whole day. So while we're out there, cackling still, again, right? You have people who should not be on the rolls, like my grandmother, and you have people who were left off the rolls, like Michael Salomon's mom, right? Someone who actually validly should be able to vote today. But someone could have impersonated my grandmother and gone and vote, basically. Like, there's all types of craziness going on in New York, and it just really disheartens me when we see people who jump on one little aspect of something, and that all of a sudden absolutely has to be the truth for what it is or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, you had Joan Walsh, one of my favorite people, Joan Walsh tweeted out, 2 white Bernie supporters were outside of a Harlem precinct today, inside full of Black and Latino people and me. Huh? Okay. Your point? Are you accusing them of breaking an election law? Where was your concern, Joan Walsh, when the Clintons in Illinois, Massachusetts, and apparently today too, have been at the polls, meeting and greeting, and granted today, right? So today, in their home county, they voted, which, everybody votes. I don't know that Barack and Michelle Obama, take pictures with people, talk to them while they're voting. I don't know that you can do that. And if you can, I'm tired of the Clintons and their followers and this technically legal crap. I don't care if it's technically legal. It's morally reprehensible, particularly when you're running for the highest office in the land. If you're standing there talking to me or hugging me when I'm in line to go exercise my God-given right to vote, like, you don't think you're going to influence me in your presence? You're standing there talking to me? Like, you're outside taking pictures, and then they have pictures of the Hillary fan club, basically, right there at the polling place. So there's like a gate. So I wonder, they probably were just right outside of 100 feet. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if these people went out there and measured, and we're like 101 feet away, right? Like, it's just all types of stuff going on. So you have the little hit squad that wants to nitpick on every little thing that any Bernie supporter in the world may do, but you have the privilege of the Hillary surrogates of the Clinton family itself and their top campaign people, and they just do and say whatever, and they are beyond reproach because they're quote-unquote real Democrats. I'm tired of it. Like, I'm so sick of it. Like, just last weekend, I know we had a caller last night that mentioned some of the stuff that Bill Clinton's been saying. You got people freaking out about all this other stuff. I don't care about corporate Democratic whores. I don't care about dollar bills. What I do care about is a campaign that claims to champion the rights of families of slain gun victims to sue, that they champion, prosecuting, mass murderers, and they're concerned about mass violence. Then you have Bill Clinton out there cracking jokes about what? Mass shootings. So I'm really tired of these arguments from so-called Dems, so-called party elites, so-called insiders, so-called political strategists who act like they're the only ones that have the right to say or think anything, and you have all this egregious behavior going on. I don't care about Charlie Rangel justifying, like when people are saying, so what if Hillary is pandering, talking about hot sauce? Like Charlie Rangel, like, seriously, Harlem, y'all need to get y'all act together and primary him if he's running again. Like, seriously, he needs to go. Because what the hell has he actually done? Like, this is a conversation we need to really have. I just asked Ben this earlier about some research he had mentioned doing before. Like, have we really looked at what have these people really been doing? Like, who has been doing what? Who is actually engaged? We have all these so-called leaders who claim to represent us. But what are they really doing? Where are they from? What are they doing? And what master? Who are they really serving? Because they're not serving us. They're not looking out for the people. Because when you look at the makeup of Harlem today, and when Charlie Rangel first came into office, it is a very different place, and a lot of people have been displaced, misplaced, and pushed out altogether. So having real Democrats, air quotes, right? Because what is a real Democrat? We come back to this. I'm sure there's a kid out there that's going to have a PhD dissertation on this whole thing. Like, we've probably done someone's PhD dissertation for them. Like, we have people talking about what is a real Democrat, this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, when you look at Senator Sanders, when you look at the things that are being argued today, like just today with people being purged from voting rolls, I think it was Liang gave the example today that, in Jim Crow South, there were one of the tools used to disenfranchise people was setting the date to register 9 months in one instance ahead of the actual voting. I mean, 6 months, 9 months, that's really far. New York has the farthest out date for party registration change. Now, I agree. Rules are rules, and a lot of y'all need to wake up and pay attention, because being outside the system, you can't all of a sudden decide you want to be involved now and then you want the rules changed to suit that. Like, I don't agree with that personally. But I do believe that those people who rightfully should have been allowed to vote, they had absolute right to demand to be re-enfranchised, so to speak, today. So I'm about to turn it over to Ben because I am out of time. But there is so much going on, and I appreciate y'all so very much for hanging in there with me. And I'm using my brother's computer tonight, and he might not get it back.
Wait a minute, you made it sound like you're going somewhere. Where are you going, Anoa?
No, I was going to cut off real quick to go get me some water because my.
That's why you think I have tea by me all the time. Let me do this for you as we transition to the next show.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Crazy mother.
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.